Hattin was not the end, it was a declaration. When Jerusalem fell in 1187, church bells rang across Europe, not in celebration but in fury. Kings rose from their thrones, armies gathered from distant lands, and one name echoed louder than all others: Richard the Lionheart. This was no longer a regional war. It was a clash of empires. This was the Third Crusade. Jerusalem fell. Europe answered. 3 kings marched. Only legends returned. This war was not about victory. 2 men. One holy land, they never met in battle. Yet history binds them forever. Acre was not a victory. It was a grave. 2 years of siege. No mercy. No escape. The city stood. But the cost was unbearable. This was not war. It was strategy. The Third Crusade explained in one story. History never tells you this part. When Jerusalem fell in October 1187, the news did not travel quickly, but when it arrived, it struck like thunder. Messengers crossed seas and mountains. Letters reached courts and cathedrals, and everywhere the reaction was the same: silence, followed by outrage. Jerusalem, the city taken at unimaginable cost in 1099, was no longer under Christian rule. And this time, it had been lost not to chaos, but to discipline. The loss of Jerusalem was not merely territorial, it was psychological. For nearly a century, the Crusader states had survived by believing in their own inevitability. Hattin shattered that belief. The defeat was total. The army destroyed the king, captured the relic of the true cross, lost. There was no illusion left to cling to. Europe demanded an answer. Pope Gregory VIII responded quickly. A papal bull was issued calling for a new crusade, not of knights alone, but of kings. This would not be a minor expedition. This would be a reckoning. Preachers spread the message across Europe. Jerusalem has fallen. God's city cries out. And for many, the call was irresistible. Unlike earlier crusades, this one would be led by rulers at the height of their power. 3 men answered the call, each powerful, each ambitious, each destined for legend. First was Frederick III, Holy Roman Emperor, known as Barbarossa, the Red-Beard. He was old by crusading standards, but he was experienced, disciplined, and commanding. Frederick did not rush. He prepared carefully. Logistics secured, routes negotiated, alliances planned. His army was enormous, perhaps the largest crusading force ever assembled. And when it marched, it shook the ground beneath it. Next came Philip II, King of France, young, calculating, and cautious. Philip did not seek glory alone, he sought advantage. His participation strengthened France's standing and limited his rival's power. Because Philip's greatest concern was not Saladin. It was England. Then came Richard of England. Tall, fierce, charismatic. Richard did not hesitate. He embraced the crusade as destiny. To his followers, he was the perfect crusader, brave in battle, skilled with sword and command, unafraid of risk. But Richard was also impatient. And impatience would shape the crusade as much as courage. For the first time, kings who distrusted each other marched toward the same goal. Richard and Philip, rivals since youth, now shared a cause. But unity was fragile. Politics followed the army wherever it went. And Saladin knew it. In the east, Saladin did not celebrate for long. He understood Europe's response was inevitable. Jerusalem was secured, garrisons were strengthened, supply lines were reinforced. Saladin avoided unnecessary battles. He had learned well from Hattin. By 1189, the Mediterranean became a highway of war. Ships crossed from Italy, France, and England. Armies marched through Anatolia and the Balkans. Gold, steel, and faith moved eastward. This was no longer a regional struggle. It was a continental response. In Europe, the crusade was imagined as redemption. In reality, it would be long, brutal, divisive victory would not come easily. Jerusalem would not be reclaimed quickly, and many who set out would never return. Saladin held Jerusalem. Europe marched east. Kings prepared to test themselves, and somewhere between pride and faith, history waited. The Third Crusade did not move as a single force. It moved in fragments. Each king chose his own path. Each army followed its own destiny. What united them in purpose would soon divide them in reality. Frederick Barbarossa chose the land route. It was longer, it was harder, but it allowed control. His army marched across Central Europe in disciplined columns, tens of thousands of men moving with imperial order. Supply trains followed carefully planned routes. Agreements were negotiated with local rulers. Nothing was left to chance. This was not a mob of pilgrims. It was an army. As the German army entered Byzantine territory, tension followed. The Byzantines remembered earlier crusades, armies that looted, burned, and ignored authority. They watched Barbarossa closely. Suspicion turned into confrontation. Markets closed, supplies disappeared, trust evaporated. Still, Barbarossa pressed on. Time was his enemy. Crossing into Anatolia, the army entered hostile ground. Seljuk forces harassed the flanks, supplies thinned. Heat punished heavily armored soldiers. Yet Barbarossa's discipline held, victories were won. Roads were forced open, the crusade still appeared unstoppable. Then in June 1190, disaster struck. Near the Salif River, Frederick Barbarossa attempted to cross. Accounts differ, whether his horse slipped, whether the current was stronger than expected. What is certain is this: the emperor drowned. Just like that, the news spread instantly. The army froze. An emperor who had ruled for decades, gone in moments, morale collapsed. Some wept, some deserted. Others pressed on without conviction. The largest crusading army ever assembled began to dissolve. Frederick's son attempted to continue the mission. But leadership without authority is fragile. Thousands turned back. Others died of disease and exhaustion. Only a fraction of the original army would ever reach the Holy Land. One king was gone, the crusade was already weakened. While Barbarossa marched, Richard and Philip chose the sea. Ships gathered across the Mediterranean. This was a different kind of war. Expensive, political, vulnerable to storms and delay. But it allowed speed, or so they believed. Richard stopped in Sicily, officially, to secure supplies. Unofficially, to assert dominance. He replaced rulers, displayed power, spent vast sums. Philip watched carefully. Rivalry deepened. Unity frayed. A storm scattered Richard's fleet. Some ships landed on Cyprus, controlled by a rebellious ruler. Richard responded instantly. He invaded. The island fell quickly. It was a brilliant conquest and a distraction. Time was slipping away. In the east, Saladin observed everything. He knew about Barbarossa's death. He heard of delays in Sicily and Cyprus. He understood what his enemies did not. Time favored the defender. Jerusalem was fortified, supply lines secured, troops rotated. Saladin would not rush. He had learned patience at Hattin. When Richard and Philip finally reached the Holy Land, they arrived not at Jerusalem, but at Acre. The city had already been under siege for nearly 2 years. Disease raged, supplies dwindled, bodies filled mass graves. This was not the glorious war Europe had imagined. This was endurance. The Third Crusade was no unified response. It was divided by politics, weakened by death, delayed by ambition. One emperor was dead, 2 kings distrusted each other, and Jerusalem remained firmly in Saladin's hands. By the time Richard and Philip arrived, Acre was no longer just a city. It was a graveyard. For nearly 2 years, Crusader forces had encircled it. And for nearly 2 years, Saladin's armies had encircled them in return. 2 rings of death, neither side able to break free. Disease had become the deadliest weapon. Inside Acre, food was rationed, water was polluted, bodies were buried hastily, or not at all outside the walls. Crusader camps rotted in the sun, dysentery spread unchecked, entire units vanished without ever fighting. This was not heroic warfare. This was survival. Saladin refused a direct assault. Instead, he harassed supply lines, attacked foragers, and struck at weak points. Every night brought alarms. Every dawn revealed new graves. The goal was simple: outlast them. When Richard the Lionheart arrived, morale surged. He brought fresh troops, siege engines, money, and authority. Soon after, Philip II of France joined him. For a brief moment, unity appeared possible. It would not last. Richard did not hesitate. He reorganized defenses, directed siege engines personally, led attacks himself. Even sick with fever, he issued orders from a litter. His presence changed everything. The walls of Acre began to crack. But while Richard fought Saladin, he also fought Philip. Disagreements over command, spoils, and prestige intensified. Every success became a political argument. The crusade was winning battles, but losing unity. By July 1191, Acre could endure no more. Walls were breached, defenders collapsed from exhaustion. The city surrendered. After 2 years of suffering, Acre had fallen. Celebration should have followed. Instead, tension exploded. Disputes over banners, territory, and prisoners erupted immediately. Philip, frustrated and ill, made a decision. He would return to France. Philip's departure shattered any illusion of unity. He left behind troops, but took rivalry with him. The Third Crusade was now Richard's war, and Saladin understood what that meant. Thousands of Muslim prisoners had been taken. Negotiations stalled. Time passed. Supplies dwindled. Richard faced a decision. In August 1191, Richard ordered the execution of the prisoners. Thousands were killed. Saladin responded in kind. The war hardened. Mercy vanished. From this point forward, the conflict changed. It was no longer just about Jerusalem. It was about honor, reputation, and will. Richard and Saladin, two commanders at the peak of their power, now faced each other directly. With Acre secured, Richard marched south along the coast. Jerusalem was still far away. But the real test was coming. Saladin would not allow another siege. He would choose the battlefield. After Acre, the Third Crusade narrowed into something more focused. Not a clash of empires, but a duel of minds. On one side stood Richard the Lionheart, aggressive, fearless, decisive. On the other stood Saladin, patient, calculating, disciplined. Both men respected strength, both men understood restraint, and both knew the next battle would decide everything. Richard chose to march south along the coast. The sea protected his flank. Ships supplied his army. Discipline was enforced mercilessly. Every movement was deliberate. Saladin shadowed him constantly. Light cavalry struck and withdrew. Arrows fell like rain. No decisive engagement was offered. This was pressure warfare. Saladin's goal was simple: break the Crusaders without committing fully. Day after day, his forces attacked the rear and flanks. Templars begged to charge. Knights cursed restraint. Richard refused, because once discipline breaks, armies collapse. Near the forest of Arsuf, Saladin sensed opportunity. The terrain favored maneuver. The Crusaders were stretched thin. This would be the test, not of courage, but of command. Saladin attacked relentlessly. Arrows darkened the sky, horses screamed, shields splintered. Still, Richard held the line. Hour after hour, the Crusader army endured what had destroyed armies before. But pressure builds. Even the strongest discipline has limits. At last, the Hospitallers broke formation. They charged without orders. For a moment, disaster loomed. Richard had seconds to decide. Punish the charge or commit fully. Richard chose battle. He unleashed the full cavalry charge. Steel thundered forward. Banners surged. The Crusader army became a single weapon. Saladin's forces withdrew in good order. This was not Hattin. This was not collapse. Richard had won the field, but Saladin had not been destroyed. Losses were balanced. Forces remained intact. The lesson was clear. Victory would not come easily. After Arsuf, something remarkable happened. Both sides paused. Messages were exchanged. Gestures of courtesy followed. Saladin sent Richard fruit and ice when he fell ill. Richard returned horses and honors. This was war, but it was war between equals. Richard advanced toward Jerusalem. Rain fell. Supplies thinned. Morale faltered. Every step closer revealed the truth. Jerusalem was fortified. Saladin was ready. The Crusaders were exhausted. Richard stood within sight of Jerusalem and turned away. He knew he could take the city, but he could not hold it. A siege would bleed his army dry. Pride demanded assault. Wisdom demanded restraint. Both sides understood reality now. Neither could destroy the other. Saladin could defend Jerusalem, but not expel the Crusaders entirely. Richard could win battles, but not the war. Talks began quietly. not as surrender, as acceptance. The Third Crusade was approaching its end, not with triumph but with balance. By 1192, the truth could no longer be ignored. The Crusader army was tired, supplies were stretched thin, reinforcements from Europe had slowed to a trickle. Disease followed every camp, rain turned roads into mud. Morale wavered. Richard the Lionheart was still undefeated in open battle, but victory without sustainability is illusion. Saladin understood this as well. His armies were strained, his territories vast. Jerusalem defended, but at great cost. Neither side could end the war by force. Talks began quietly, not as surrender, not as weakness, but as necessity. Richard and Saladin communicated through envoys, men who crossed enemy lines carrying words instead of steel. Both leaders knew what their followers did not yet accept. This war would not be decided by one final battle. The agreement reached was simple and historic. Jerusalem would remain under Muslim control, but Christian pilgrims would be allowed safe access. The Crusader states would survive along the coast, reduced but alive. It was not the victory Europe had imagined, but it was peace. Richard departed without Jerusalem. To some, this was failure. To others, survival. He had preserved the Crusader presence. He had faced Saladins and lived, but his crusade ended not in triumph, but in compromise. Saladin did not celebrate. He returned to governing, to restoring order, to rebuilding lands exhausted by war. Within a year, he would die, leaving behind not an empire of fear, but a reputation of honor. Even his enemies mourned him. But the Third Crusade did not reclaim Jerusalem, yet it reshaped history. It showed that discipline could defeat rage, that restraint could equal strength, that respect between enemies was possible. It produced no absolute winner, but it produced legends. Centuries later, their names are still spoken together, not because they destroyed each other, but because they did not. In an age of brutality, both men showed restraint. In an age of slaughter, both understood limits. That is why history remembers them. Some of the Crusades did not end in 1192. They would continue again and again. Jerusalem would change hands, empires would rise and fall, and new powers would emerge from the east. The war was paused, not concluded. Although some battles decide territory, others decide reputation. The Third Crusade decided how history would judge its leaders. The war for Jerusalem did not end here. In our next battle memoir, we follow the moment when an unstoppable force finally met its end. Ayin Jalut, 1260, the battle that stopped the Mongols. If you want the next chapter of history, subscribe and turn on notifications, because history is not just something you learn, it is something you must remember.